Hi, everyone. This is Stefanie Hoover back again with another episode of Inside Scoop. And I'm here with my good friend, like Jamie. You and I are like Zoom buddies. I
Sure.
got to know each other via Zoom. But Jamie Kress is with Sensormatic, and we're going to have a really great conversation today. I'm hoping it's going to be great. I haven't just jinxed us, but we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is total retail loss, and really dig into it a little bit and kind of talk about Sensormatic's take on it and Jamie's take on it. But before we get going, just in case anyone doesn't know who you are, Jamie, can you give us a little intro?
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all. So, Jamie Kress, I manage our RFID business for Sensormatic. Primarily focus my day-to-day activities in North America, though I do get in other regions quite frequently. And while I am focused on RFID, there's so many loss prevention based use cases that are popping up in the market. I now spend, I would say, at least 50 to 60% of my time in our traditional loss prevention business as well. So there's my background. Been doing it for about a little over 20 years.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I think, you and I have talked before about RFID and how it's a long time coming.
Yeah.
And I think this concept of total retail loss is a long time coming as well. Way back in the day, I always talk about that when I'm on these podcasts. We dabbled in all areas of the business, but there really wasn't a label for it. And I think, we now have this term total retail loss, and it's really being a good business partner and looking to wherever losses can happen. But maybe from your perspective, Jamie, just kind of give us a little definition of total retail loss.
Sure. Certainly we didn't coin the phrase. People have been talking about total retail loss for years.
Right.
I've talked to others at the company about this, and it's not that the concept is new, but what's new is that the tools that we have to help define it, quantify it. Retailers for years have known that it's not just about ORC coming in and the bad actors taking goods out of your stores. It's not just about employees who are stealing, one or two items a day over the course of their term with a retailer. There was a lot more loss taking place, but we didn't have the tools to quantify it. And I think that's what's different now is we have video, we have RFID, we have all these fantastic new technologies that can help loss prevention professionals really understand where are those major areas where they're losing items, and then where are those corner cases and what can they do to stop those areas. So the definition of total retail loss is not new, but how we can go after it is what's new.
Absolutely. I think back to sort of like I guess my first exposure to it was looking at a refund procedure at point of sale.
Yeah.
And our whole LP team got involved with us and we're trying to solve for it. It really was an operational issue, but it did cause shrink, right? So, this was sort of these like human errors that come up, and it makes me kind of think about what else happens at point of sale.
Right.
Anything else you can think of?
Well, you have items that you have the traditional issues at point of sale, right? You have cashiers or folks at point of sale who are ringing up some items but putting more items in the bag. That's the traditional loss you see at the point of sale.
Hmm.
Um, a salesperson being more overt in their theft, if you will. But there's mistakes that are happening. There are items being put into bags by mistake they shouldn't have. There are the returns example is such a great one. We've all been there in the store when you're returning goods. You've got some things you want to keep and some things you want to return. And plus, they've already got merchandise on and around their desk. So it gets very complex,
Right.
confusing. I think anytime you have a human interaction in a store like that, there is bound to be errors and shrink and loss and confusion around what products need to be. And there is always the invariable, I want to return this medium, but I think I want to get this large. And then you start to really distort your inventory by simple mistakes being made, either on purpose or by mistake by the sales associates.
Yeah, I mean, literally, this just happened to me this week. I was at a store purchasing something, and the cashier, it looked like they were two of the same, but they weren't the two of the same item. They were different, but they just scanned it, this one item twice,
Right.
right?
And I don't think, it's wonderful for all of us as consumers
Mhm.
that we can now return items that we bought online to the store. But I
Yeah,
think that's adding, different retailers all have different philosophies on how they handle online returns. Some allow online returns to the stores, some don't. I've taken an online item that I purchased to a store, and they've been a little unsure of what their policy is, especially if it's an item they don't carry in the stores. Should they return this or not? And what typically happens is the store will say, "Okay, we'll take that return back. You buy a lot from us." And what happens with that item? That item either sits in the back room and it's never sold, it sits there for years, or there's just no visibility to what that item could be. And that's one of the things that I've seen RFID do is when items get returned to the point of sale, even if it's an item that's not being sold in those stores, RFID can now point out, oh, this item is in the four walls of the store. Let's make sure you try to sell this item before you're at a complete loss on the margin of that item.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know it's NRF. I was talking with Tony D'Onofrio about this whole thing, and he said that you guys have come up with a solution to affect or impact sweethearting. And
Yeah.
I can tell you, sweethearting is one of those really difficult methods of theft to solve.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
And you've tried to solve it through looking at video, what's happening at the point of sale, and try
Yeah.
to you look at a certain store that might having more loss than is expected, and you try to solve it through traditional means, and it's just time consuming.
Yeah.
Not getting the best bang for the investigator's buck. Now we have the tools with our shrink analyzer tool with sweethearting. It's a component of that solution. It allows you to look at what's being rung up, at the point of sale, and then comparing that to the actual items that are leaving the front of the store. And you can really start to see trends in, gosh, I'm seeing one or two, maybe 5 items that are rung up, but I'm seeing 8 items or 10 items at the point of sale. And you can really, with the technology we have today between video and RFID, really hone in on those issues and those trends and start to identify, gosh, between the hours of, 3 p.m. and close at 7 p.m., we're seeing a significant increase in those differences and really start to identify where that problem is occurring.
Right. Once, twice could be an accident, but when you really start to see those trends with specific cashiers, I think to your point, really honing in the attention of that investigator would be, it's a huge win.
Yeah, and some of it is accepted as the cost of doing business, but I don't think we need to accept all of those things anymore. Certainly there are some small things you don't want to go after, but in large stores with large volumes and now that we can begin to look at maybe the same person causing the same loss continuously, those cases kind of grow in dollar size. It's worth it to go after those things that before were just the cost of doing business, and it might not be worth a very small LP team's time to go after. Now it's easier to go after it, so it's worth their time.
Right. Okay, so we started with point of sale. Let's kind of shift around that store a little bit and think about total retail loss and how losses can occur on the sales floor that go beyond just like shoplifting. What can retailers do about those issues?
Certainly shoplifting is the number one. We also see, the age old. I was just talking to a retailer last week about, we keep finding price tickets in our fitting rooms. In the old days, we'd find those price tickets shoved behind the mirror or wherever it might be, and you assume loss. But now you can actually find those items with RFID, especially if they're not visible to the human eye. Find those items, know what they are, write those items off as loss, and then more importantly, make sure you're replenishing those items to the store. Certainly you have some challenges if they're fast turn, fast fashion type items that may not be as you want to order them back into the store. But more often than not, you just want to know, what did I lose? What can I ideally replenish back into the store? And do I see an area of the store that's causing more problems? Are certain fitting rooms I'm seeing more tags, more theft happening in certain fitting rooms? Do I want to increase my staffing in the fitting room area? Do I want to increase my staffing in certain areas of the store where we know theft is happening from? So if you think about, and I'm probably going a little off your question, but with the old EAS tools that we had with alarms going off, we would know that we had loss, and we'd see the alarm, we know we had a problem, and we try to identify what was stolen. And we can get so much more granular now. We can understand when is loss occurring, what are the exact mix of items that are happening at the same time. We can see those categories. We can see what time of day those things are happening. And then that directs us into the areas of the store. So if you know that you're having in a certain store a higher theft during the afternoon hours of swimsuits, then you can direct your sales team to say, we are seeing a significant uptick between these hours of these categories. Make sure you're putting some folks, if you can, in those areas of the store, because we obviously have a growing problem.
I'm also thinking, things like operations, like markdown procedures. I got to imagine that using RFID to identify, where are the goods that need to be a markdown taken on. If you're still kind of doing it manually with the ticket out on the floor, which a lot of retailers are still doing, I got to imagine RFID would be huge in helping with that.
You got reticketing, you've got just counting for cycle count purposes.
Right.
There's return to DCs that you are doing constantly, probably throughout the year. Process today, they get a list, they're going through that list, trying to find those items in a store, which is sometimes next to impossible, that you want to package up and send it back to DC or send it off to another store. The amount of time that you can save by doing that with tools like RFID is pretty substantial. To be able to get a list, grab a handheld, and have the handheld find those items for you is significantly faster than the way we did it, 5-10 years ago.
I worked in retail before buy online, pick up in store. So I can't even imagine the nightmare that a sales associate would have trying to find an item without RFID.
Well, yeah, and I worked in retail too, back through college and after college. And I can't even imagine, and there's so many differences now. One, you have the technology to make their lives easier, but even made worse is there's fewer of them in the store. The staff has been cut down to next to nothing.
Yeah.
We go into stores and talk to the sales associates. They wear so many hats throughout the day. Sometimes there's only 2 folks covering a store during those open hours. And so in the morning, they wear the hat of replenishment from backroom to sales floor. Then they do the store open. They're kind of running back and forth, grabbing merchandise for sales associates. At the same time, many of them are getting orders throughout the day that are online orders. So when the traffic in the store is a little low, they need to go find those orders, find those items in the store, and then package those up and ship them to customers, all while keeping an eye on the store and making it safe and making it secure and making it look nice for the next customer who walks in the door. They really have to have tools to allow them to do that, because if they use traditional means by making lists and walking around trying to find things and relying on the beep at the exit to let them know there might be a problem happening, they'll never get through the day. They just have too many tasks for too few people.
It'd be a nightmare. I can't even imagine.
It would.
Yeah. Again, you and I are on the same page with RFID. Like, it's just a long time coming. And why wouldn't you want to help your associates do their job better? Like, it's mind blowing.
I think, most sales associates want to find those items for you. They want to make the sale. I was in a store last night looking for something, and it was a clearance item. And they said, gosh, look, if I could, let me see if I can find these items in a different store for you. Let me see if I can ship these from another location. 9 times out of 10, those sales associates want to make that sale, even if they're not on a commission. They want to make the most of their time in the store, and they want to find those items for you. And back to the idea of total retail loss, they're probably the most frustrated of anybody, because many times you've been there too, I'm sure. They go to look up the item in the system to see if it's there, and they say, well, they say we have it. The store says we have it. Do I have it? And as we know from all the examples in RFID, it's a 2-pronged problem. Maybe you do have it and you can't find it, or you don't have it, but the system says you do, so you're never going to get replenishment of that particular item. So it's a very frustrating job for those folks, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, as we're kind of walking around our store, let's think about even before the store in the supply chain. How do we think about total retail loss in the supply chain?
Well, first, we need to make sure that items are correctly tagged, which 9 times out of 10, things are correctly tagged. We're actually doing a lot of work right now using RFID to make sure items are correctly tagged and that everything is tagged. We're putting in audit stations and distribution centers, so we can validate that all the vendors who are tagging for a retailer are actually getting all the tags on those items. So putting those through a value-added service line to make sure everything was tagged properly. But then you also have I've seen offsite storage locations that are densely packed, really tough
Mhm.
to find. Sometimes those are associated with a distribution center, and sometimes those are offsite storage locations for large malls or outlet centers. I've been to several for the larger outlet centers, like in Orlando and some in New York. And it's just hard to find items. So items are quickly put away, oftentimes lost. Sometimes they're there, but someone can never find the pair of jeans that was mistakenly put away in the jackets. Um, but you also have a lot of bad actors throughout the supply chain who are taking things. So I think you have both kinds of loss. You have inadvertent loss, and then you have loss by the bad actors.
Yeah, I think, the loss by the bad actors has been sort of hidden over the years. We've always just sort of chalked it up to, oh, it's just an issue in the supply chain because there wasn't visibility. Uh,
Right?
and I think we're to the point, I'm seeing a lot of activity with RELA and NRF, getting supply chain involved with some of the, Corca legislation and other things going on. We might be at a tipping point.
I think we are for sure.
Yeah.
And I've probably told you this example before, but it's one of my favorite examples of I love when a retailer uses the technology for things that you never thought, you didn't train them on. They just kind
Right.
of found their own way to use the example. And it's kind of a supply chain example. We had a retailer who was at the last stop of the delivery truck. If they knew their store was the last stop, they're going out and taking a RFID handheld and cycle counting that empty truck. And they've actually found many, many times on that last stop, there were items that were shoved in different areas of that truck. So throughout the day, they're making multiple stops, and then they're done. And lo and behold, there's items that are still in that truck, I'm sure by mistake. But
Of course.
it's one more use of the technology that it doesn't take 2 minutes to go and cycle count, use that handheld in that truck, but it identifies a massive problem because if they're finding one or two items in that truck, multiply that times 500 stores and 200 trucks and
Mhm.
20 drivers who are up to who are not exactly who we want them to be. So I love those examples of identifying a small problem and then looking at the macro effect that problem has on the total supply chain.
Yeah, that's great stuff. It's sort of like combining RFID with video, right? I'm sure that retailers are chomping at the bit with that. So how can they leverage that?
Well, we have our shrink analyzer solution, which I've talked to you about before.
Mhm.
It does not require video, though every retailer that has started using it says we want to look at the video associated with these loss events. And what we do typically is we say if we don't currently support your video package, we can deploy video with your pilot, and then we can develop our support for your particular video package. But what retailers are doing is they're looking at those loss events and immediately tying those to the video in the store. Ideally, there's already a lot of video already in the store, so you can look at the concealment, where that concealment happened in the store, tying that to the event at the exit or the event at the point of sale. It really becomes a core piece of the overall solution because the data is great. It's almost overwhelming at times, but it's the video that takes that massive amounts of data and makes it more actionable. And we're seeing a tremendous growth in tying that video to the data you're getting with RFID and smart exits. And I think it's only going to grow. I think we're going to see more and more video in more and more places throughout the store that we can tie to RFID events. The back room receiving, another great example
Mhm.
where we're seeing a lot of errors and we're seeing a lot of problems and we're seeing a lot of theft. And tying that to the video in the back room is going to be just as important as it is for the front of the store.
Yeah, I think, most retailers, especially, in the LP departments, you've got to justify your spend, right? So if you can justify video by showing ROI with RFID, like why not combine all these technologies and just aggregate the power, in my opinion. But
And what you said about we were talking earlier about the sales associates in the store. There's
Mhm.
fewer of them wearing lots of hats. Just as true, if not more so, for the investigators in the LP organization. There's
Absolutely.
fewer investigators today, I'm sure, than there was 10, 15 years ago, wearing many more hats. ORC is at an all-time high, so they're trying to look at what's the biggest bang for my buck? Can I look for bulk theft events first? We do a lot of that bulk theft event analysis in our system. We're looking at how do we make their lives easier? How do we incorporate machine learning and potentially some AI into our tools to begin to look at all that theft that's happening in the four walls of the store, so the system becomes smarter and starts to say, here is where you are likely having more and more theft. So we're really looking at how do we take those tools and make our system smarter so that the loss prevention professionals can do more with less.
So speaking of working smarter, I think folks who work in LP probably have a pretty good understanding of total retail loss, but how do you get that message over to your partners in retail? So within operations or merchandising, what steps can you take to partner with those departments?
Yeah, I think the first thing is awareness. The data speaks volumes. And I think when people start to understand what the size of the potential prize is, it really helps. So for us to be able to sit down with a retailer, a cross-functional room of retail within a retail environment and say, here is where we're seeing the loss occurring in your enterprise, and let's focus on the store. Here's where we're seeing the loss occurring in your store, and then drill it down. Here's where we're seeing the loss occurring with your categories. Here's where we're seeing the loss occurring by time of day. Here's where we're seeing, different types of loss, intentional loss through bad actors or unintentional loss through bad processes. I think sitting down with all those different departments in a retailer can be really eye-opening. And typically we have found that store operations will raise their hand immediately and say, I know how to solve that first problem. I can change the process where we're doing something different at point of sale. Or I had no idea that you had data that was pointing towards sweethearting. So I have, store operations can help figure that one out, both through training, more diligence upon looking at the folks who are using the point of sale. And the supply chain team is also always very open to where are those losses occurring. They run pretty leanly. They were the first groups to be Six Sigma and to really utilize barcodes and really, really wind down their processes to be really tight.
Right.
And RFID is just giving them one more tool set to make it even tighter. So I found that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was having these conversations, you'd have groups say, well, my area is working pretty well. The problem is over there. The problem is over here. And we're not seeing that much anymore. Now there's more of a coming around the table and saying, we know the problem is real. Each of us take a piece of the pie, and what can we do to solve it? And again, it goes like we started with the conversation, it comes down to the tools. Once they have the tools and the data to solve it, they're much more open to taking accountability for it.
Yeah, and you know what? The proof is in the pudding. People want to see the numbers. I've always found that, when you're sitting in those meetings, come with the data.
Yeah, exactly. And we're seeing that with Shrink Analyzer. We're seeing it more and more. We're seeing, interestingly, we're seeing more cases. We're seeing the cases that are being solved faster. I mean, people have said they've gone from, multiple months down to 2 weeks being able to close cases. And we're also seeing a lot of sharing between retailers. We do a fair amount of work looking at fencing locations, identifying stolen merchandise in fencing locations. And we're seeing more and more, almost every week to 2 weeks, we're seeing cases where retailers are coming to us and saying, can you help? We had a large bust in a certain fence location, and we're seeing merchandise from retailer A, B, C, and D, and then many others. And those retailers are working together to create really large cases that they can go after these large ORC teams. And that's what's really fun, is to see that collaboration among the retailers.
Yeah, I love that you're mentioning speeding up the closure rate.
Yeah.
That's something that's been bothering me for years. Wow, these cases just linger on and on. How can we stop the bleed faster?
Yeah, and that we're certainly seeing that. I mean, I've heard several folks in the presentations in Dallas when you and I were there at NRF. Yeah. There were several different folks speaking about how much faster it is to close these cases, not just because of you having the technology, but you have the technology plus the video, and you have all those things that you can feed that data into their existing tools or create their new BI tools. We are seeing those cases closed faster with fewer people having to be touching those cases. That's the other thing. You used to have larger teams that had to go after each of those over a long period of time, and that's just cost.
Yeah, right.
So being able to utilize your resources for a shorter closure rate is probably one of our top 3 benefits that we see.
So talk to me a little bit about predictive and prescriptive analytics. I know we always, for over years, we're talking about, predictive analytics. It was sort of like this pie in the sky sort of thing. Is this coming to fruition, or do we feel like retailers are buying into it now? Are they seeing
Yeah,
the return?
I do think we're seeing that. I think,
Okay.
being able to be more precise in what those analytics are going after, where you're seeing the trouble spots through prescriptive analytics, we are seeing more of that. It kind of goes back to some of the machine learnings too. We need to use technology for our own benefits. We need to use technology to help us be smarter, because the data coming out of it is only as good as the data going into it. Or I said that the reverse. The data coming out of it is only as good as the data going in. We see that we are being able to fine tune the data and fine tune where retailers should be spending more time. So I do think there are pretty significant improvements in that area, but there's a lot to learn too. And I think that's what we're finding. Having those retailers work together makes our solution better, makes our services that we deliver to our customers better, and makes them better. We hosted an event. I think your team joined us for in the fall every year. It's a smart exit workshop, and having those retailers come into a room and all work together about how can they use the analytics across their different environments, and what does a DIY retailer have to learn from a grocery retailer that has to learn from an apparel retailer. Those are the really interesting conversations, because at the heart of it, they all still have the same total retail loss problem, but how they're going after it is different. How the bad actors and the ORC teams are behaving in their environments is different, but the tools are the same, so they can all leverage each other's learnings.
Yeah, huge fan of sharing information. It just helps each other, and you never know. Somebody could have this awesome idea, that you'd never thought of, and you wouldn't know it unless you went to one of these meetings and share, whether it was at the NRF doing a presentation or at your smart exit workshop. It's just so important to share information.
Yeah, it's also, I was talking to someone the other day, it's also a common enemy. When retailers look at some of their legacy systems and they don't want to share how they do things, well, that's because they have their own unique way of doing merchandising or assortment planning or visual merchandising. That's their own benefit that they have to offer their customer base. When it comes to loss prevention, we all have the same common enemy, and that's the folks out there who are stealing from the stores. And so sharing in the loss prevention community is a tremendously different enterprise than sharing in those other areas where people get a little bit nervous to share information. There's no reason to be nervous to share information in the loss prevention community, because it makes all of us better at catching the bad guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts, Jamie, on like long-term benefits of this, total retail loss holistic approach? I know we've talked about a bunch of benefits, but anything else you can think of?
Yeah, no, I think we are going to see more and more of the collaboration across the retailers. We're going to see more and more connection to what's happening with ORC. We're going to see more and more with video. We're going to expand the definition of what is a smart exit. When we started talking about this 5 years ago, actually more, a smart exit was truly an exit. Well, it's no longer truly an exit. We're going to have smart fitting rooms where we can determine where there's loss. We're going to have smart back rooms where we understand what's happening in the back room. Distribution centers are going to get smarter and smarter throughout the supply chain, even from source, when items may be finding their way into gray market. So I think the definition of total retail loss and the definition of smart parts of the store or smart parts of the supply chain is going to continue to change. We'll be sitting here 3 to 5 years from now with tons of data that our system has generated, tons of data from machine learning and AI, and those tools getting smarter with more and more data inputs. And we're going to probably be talking about an area of the supply chain that we didn't even know was as big of a problem as it was, that we had little control over. So that's what's exciting about the industry, is we're learning more things every single day, every single week, that we can go target and make improvements on.
Yeah, I think it's one of the great things about being in LP is, I feel like we're early adopters on a lot of things. Retail in general is a little bit slow to make changes, but I feel like LP is sort of on that cutting edge. And with all these changes with RFID and, total retail loss, we're well positioned to be, you know, seated at the table in leadership at any retailer. And I think, we just need to keep leveraging folks like Sensormatic and all the other solution providers out there that are, really making some great technologies and putting a lot of research and development into their technologies. I know I appreciate you guys and everything you're doing to help the industry. And I just want to thank you, Jamie, for being with me today.
Yeah.
And hopefully you have a great rest of your summer.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for having me.
Um,
Really always excited to talk about this topic. And I agree, giving our loss prevention professionals the seat at the table is
mhm.
critical so that they can be a part of the master plan of how they're going to attack loss and they're going to leverage these new technologies. So happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. We'll catch you on another episode.
Absolutely.
Take care.